All right, welcome back, everybody. It's been a crazy day and a half of lots of great topics, and today we're going to wrap it up. I am honored to be here with Peter Chapman, the President and Chief Executive Officer of IonQ. So Peter's been there, what, 2 years now, I think? 2 fast or long years, I'm not sure, maybe both, depending on what perspective you're looking at. So, you know, he takes pride in having been a part of the company's transformation from just a theoretical concept into a tangible computing option for innovative enterprises. Before taking on his current role, Chapman was Director for Engineering at Amazon Prime. He said that he was one of two technical directors who ran the technology behind the company. Before that, he was President and CEO of MediaArchvich. Does that sound right?
MediaArch.
MediaArch.
Yep.
Oh, there it is, which was born out of a merger between eMusic.com and KNFB Reading Technologies. So he's no stranger to building companies from the ground up. Prior to that, he founded 2 companies. 1989, he founded a video game company called Level Systems, and in 1997, he founded Boston Compliance Systems. And he's obtained various degrees from MIT and Harvard University Extension School. So we're really honored to have you here, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I thought we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation. First, dig into a little bit of the background. You were just recently up in New York. There was a bell that you rang. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so of course, I'm sure everyone knows, we got a chance to ring the opening bell at the NYSE, which is one of those bucket list items. It's actually been a kind of crazy week because we went and did that on Friday, and then on Tuesday went to the White House to talk about quantum. And you know, it's just like, that's a pretty cool 3 or 4 days. And you know, for the company and for the industry to be kind of the first pure play quantum company to make it to the NYSE is a huge achievement, not only obviously for IonQ, but for the industry in large. You know, it's fascinating to see, since we announced this transaction, how many little companies and competitors now reference us as their kind of their peer in their valuations and raising money and all the rest. I find even more entertaining is, you know, our pitch deck that we used to get here is now seems to be the model pitch deck to choose from to raise money. So we should get into that business and helping other companies, you know, kind of raise money. So it's been a great journey.
Well, and we are your neighbors right here in the Discovery District, so perhaps that's something the Quantum Startup Foundry can help you with.
Definitely, yeah. We're, you know, being kind of obviously a spin out from the University of Maryland and also from Duke, and here in the Discovery District, being one of the first ones to be a public company gives us great pride as well.
There are not many, part of my portfolio at the University of Maryland is Chief Innovation Officer is the Tech Transfer Office. And there are not many successes that you can talk to out of a tech transfer transaction that go public and that have seen the type of awesome success that you have. So when I talk to other tech transfer offices around the country, they say, you know, we say, well, how did you get that big one? They say, we got lucky. So we're really happy that you got lucky and we got lucky as a result.
Well, you know, a little funny story on the way to the NYSE. Is I asked a lot of our venture capital investors, did they want to come with us to, because we could invite 100 guests. And so, and I thought, geez, you know, we have kind of the who's who of VCs. And I thought, well, they must do this all the time. And so I called them and said, you know, do you want to come? And they were like, yes, absolutely. And I said, isn't this kind of old hat for you? He said, no, it doesn't actually happen that often.
No, it doesn't.
You know, in the history of the company, we've done 3 or 2 or something. And these are really large, you know, venture capital firms. And so you really started to get a sense of how actually unique this really is. And because, you know, if the world's largest VCs don't do this all the time, then it really is kind of special. So.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if this is true or not, but we invited the entire company to come as part of that 100. And I doubt that there's been many companies that have gotten listed on the NYSE where you invited the entire company to come along with you for the party. And so I don't know if we're the only ones, but it would be kind of a fascinating statistic. So we'll have to dig into
that's a testament to the kind of company you're running, though.
Yes.
And the one thing I'd like to point out really quick, so we're going to go through some mythbusters. Peter was talking about, there's a lot of false information that's going around, a lot of myths and urban legends about quantum computing. So we're going to go through those. But before we do that, I just want to point out that, Peter, your background is not in quantum. You're not a quantum physicist.
Nope.
You're not, so you had never really worked in quantum prior to IonQ, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So I got a call from a headhunter, and they said, would you be interested in taking on this role as CEO, president of a quantum company? And I said, there must be other people that have more quantum experience than I do, because I'm a software engineer. And they said, well, we've got these two guys who know all the physics and all the quantum stuff. We really need help in the software and the business side. That's where we're lacking, and so that's what we're looking for. The quantum stuff, we've got people that know that. You don't need to know that. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, that is definitely me. And so it's been a good partnership with Chris and Jungsang, the two co-founders, in that kind of between the three of us, we all bring kind of pieces the others are missing and kind of bring it together as a complete team. Chris is the physicist, Jungsang's the kind of engineer and photonics guy, and I'm kind of the business and software guy. And so between the three of us, we make up one whole person.
So yeah, for those CEOs who are wondering, how do we make this work? That's it. Yeah, you get the trifecta. You get the business, you get the two sides of the technical, as if it was that easy. Maybe not that easy, but
maybe.
Yeah, but you were at the right place at the right time. So let's talk a little bit about the technology side of the business. So one question: when will quantum computers actually beat classical computers?
So this question was asked at the White House. The White House brought together 30 quantum companies, and this was one of the questions. And it was really kind of fascinating, the answers, because there was a wide spectrum of voices, and no one could agree. And in that sense, I thought actually it was a bit of a missed opportunity for the quantum industry, because we came with so many different answers to that question. And thinking about it since then, I've come to a slightly more refined realization that it divides into two camps. If you have quantum hardware, then you think it's likely going to be 2 to 3 years away. If you don't have quantum hardware today, you think it's 10 to 15 years away, and it might be longer depending on how long you think you'll have quantum hardware. So if you don't think you're going to have quantum hardware for 15 years, the default answer is 30 years away. So the problem for that, both for investors and also it turns out for the administration, is we confuse people because we have all these different voices. And so it would be really good if when people are asking these questions, how they answer them is instead of answering as if it was a single answer for an entire industry, if at the end of every answer they gave, they just simply said, for my hardware. So if the question was, how many qubits do you need to do something useful? If the answer came back, I think I need, 10 million qubits to do something useful for my hardware, then that would be much more indicative of an actual truth. But instead what happens is somebody comes out and says, well, I think I need millions of qubits to do something interesting. That gets picked up in the press, and it gets peanut butter spread across the entire industry. And we all know that, depending on the error correction rates that you have, that will drive how many qubits you need. But that never, that detail kind of never gets picked up in the press. And so instead what happens is you get somebody that needs 1 million error-corrected qubits, and they get picked up in the press, or they say to the White House, it'll be millions of qubits before you can do anything interesting. They're not wrong. It's just for their hardware platform. And I think you could kind of say this is a kind of a different kind of hype, but we're not really talking about it as an industry in a kind of cohesive way that to be able to talk to customers and also to the administration.
That's a great point, and that's really important because we all know, we've heard there's just like so much misinformation that it just confuses people. And I was actually hosting a webinar with, it was a conversation, Zoom conversation with Chris Monroe, with Professor Monroe, and he was talking about the uses for the different architectures for quantum computers, and we seem to come to the conclusion that there could be more than one winner in the hardware race.
Well, you know, just to use a little financial speak, the TAM, the total addressable market for this thing, is expected to be bigger than today's hardware market and software market combined. And so that's the reason the world's largest companies are chasing after this. And of course, it's the reason that governments all over the world have decided they need to be a leader in quantum. So it's this massive, opportunity, which is going to be hopefully bigger than today's, classical computing business. It would take a great deal of hubris to go through and say that there's going to be one company that's going to dominate all those things. I can't imagine one company dominating the classical business, and I don't think that that will be the case for quantum either. If quantum really fills its true potential, there's going to be room for many winners in the hardware space, many winners in software. And so, in fact, actually, just even on a larger front, a lot of times, we see hardware companies kind of competing against each other, jockeying for position and all the rest. I don't think that the risk is actually how IonQ does versus Google or IBM or any of those companies. The risk is inherent in quantum. And so if quantum works for one company, it'll work kind of for everyone. And so that's the larger risk factor. So I would hope that actually, as an industry, we could actually start to think about how we might work together to reduce the common risk rather than kind of competing against each other. So
the atoms and qubits are a little hard to control, I take it.
Well, there's in quantum, no matter which your choice, there seems to be an infinite amount of work to be done.
Right.
And so, whether you're building quantum networking or, there's just way too much. We're still waiting for, Bill Gates to show up and create quantum basic. And we need Dan Bricklin to show up and do the quantum version of the spreadsheet. And IonQ isn't going to create those things. So, where are the entrepreneurs who are going to be the next, Lotus 1, 2, 3 or next Microsoft? Hopefully there's some of the people in this room.
I think there's some in the room perhaps
Yeah.
here. He's giving you some hints on where to go with that. So that's kind of into my next question. We just had a panel that was talking about the business case for quantum. So where do you see the first applications coming for quantum?
So right now at IonQ at least, we see kind of two applications, which one is machine learning. We had put in our investor deck that we thought by 2023 that machine learning would start to be the first kind of thing to fall to quantum computers. But just recently, in this last 9 months or so, we've been doing quite a bit of machine learning. You might have seen the announcements with Fidelity and Goldman Sachs, and also with General Electric. And this is applying now quantum to machine learning and got some amazing results. We have now seen in 3 areas where we can beat the best classical results in machine learning. And so even though the quantum computers themselves are not more powerful than the best classical systems. And so, and even more interestingly, we found that in certain machine learning algorithms, the little noise actually helps. That if we actually improve the noise, it actually got a worse result. And so there's kind of surprising that a little noise actually helps in the training of the model. And then the other thing I thought was, so first is we did a better than the classical algorithms, in that the models that we created actually did a better. And then with Fidelity, in the training of the model, this had been theorized, but now we've seen it for the first time, that a quantum computer would be able to train a machine learning model much faster. And we got 1,000x improvement. So in the classical GPU-based system, it took 20,000 iterations to create the model. But with a quantum version of it, we did it in only 26 iterations.
Wow.
And so if you think, today, if I was to, they tell me at OpenAI it costs, millions of dollars just to train their model. in terms of expense, so they haven't spent that money since the beginning of COVID. So their machine learning model doesn't know anything about COVID or COVID slang. And so, but they presumably don't run it to update it because the cost of training the model. Well, if you could now train the model 1,000 times, fewer iterations, that means then a bunch of things. One is we could create bigger machine learning models. Two, it looks like we can create better ones. And three is the cost of those things can come down. Instead of just the FANG companies doing, this high-end machine learning, now kind of everyone else could do it. And this is not yet the real promise that people talked about machine learning. Machine learning was the idea of, well, we can do things that classical could never do. That's when you could get to, so many variables that you could only do it on a quantum computer. But we're seeing now that actually we can beat the best classical machine learning algorithms out there. And so it's a little bit of a funny business because you can't really say it's not quantum supremacy, it's not quantum advantage, right? It's just simply thinking in quantum and actually has this commercial advantage. And the customer at the end of the day doesn't care about quantum supremacy or quantum advantage or anything else. All they know is they have a trading algorithm. They've been working on that trading algorithm for 20 years to get it to be the best that it can. And some, young pups show up with a quantum algorithm and 6 months later manage to beat that algorithm. And all the intellectual discussion about theory and quantum and whether or not quantum will beat classical and all the rest of that suddenly dissolves away, right?
Yeah, they don't care about how you do it. They just want to know what you're doing. And in fact, full disclosure, I just got into quantum about 1.5 years ago, and it was the Quantum Computing for Babies book that got me there. There's a clue about what's coming up here. But I saw that, and that was what actually part of the thing that spurred me to take my master's in machine learning, which I'll finish in December. And there's a whole class. So the whole time I'm going through this class on optimization, I'm thinking, this is about to be, we're not going to need to worry about optimizing if we're able to do it on quantum computing. So the changes are definitely far-reaching, it seems, and are coming, yes?
Very much so.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through some myth-busters really quickly here, but I also want to leave time for folks to have questions. So be thinking about your questions so that we can, really drive the conversation in the direction that you'd like us to go. So we'll be on standby with the microphones, but we'll go through some of just raise your hand, and as soon as we see somebody with a microphone, we'll go there, and we can kind of go back and forth. How's that sound, Peter?
Sounds
that
good.
Work? All right, so Mythbuster, superconducting qubits have an advantage because they can leverage the classical semiconductor industry over other qubit types.
So certainly I think that was the idea, at least at some point, when we started, kind of creating those kinds of qubits. But obviously we've gotten to a point where if you're going into superconducting materials and having to go down to 0 degrees Kelvin, that storyline doesn't make any sense. If you took your laptop and put it in your freezer, it won't work. And so this idea that there's this semiconductor industry all ready to do kind of semiconductor-based qubits is, I say that myth is broken. So.
Okay. So does more qubits mean you have a better quantum computer?
So there's a set of things that get picked up by the press, and sometimes people put out press releases, and I think this was one of the ones which is highly misleading. In the quantum industry, there's two things that have to happen at the same time to get a more powerful quantum computer. Everyone in the quantum industry knows it, right? It's not a secret. Is you have to improve your gate fidelities at the same time as increasing the number of qubits. So if you're coming out and saying that I'm going to have 100 qubits at the end of this year, and your gate fidelity is at 95%, then it means 3 of those qubits are usable for doing kind of what we'd say kind of for most quantum applications. Now, if I increase that to 150 qubits, it wouldn't make any difference at all. Only 3 qubits would be useful. Now, at some point, depending on what your overhead is for error correction, then you could buy more fidelity with the error correction. But now you need to have a lot more qubits based on the amount. So if, let's say, this mythical company that we're talking about was at 95%, we'd have to do out the math, but the amount of error correction that you need to do is a function of the error that you're trying to gap. And my guess is in that case, it's more than 100,000 qubits just to create one good qubit. So they're stuck at 3 usable qubits. They can talk about 500 qubits, 1,000 qubits. None of that really matters until they either improve their gate fidelities or they get to enough physical qubits that they can bring in error correction. So when you see a company that comes out and says, in 2023, we're going to have 1,000 qubits, that's completely meaningless. Because what they don't say is, and we're going to either do one of two things. We're going to have error correction at 16 to 1, in which case then it would be meaningful, or that their gate fidelities would have to be 4 nines, 99.99. Otherwise, they'll be completely limited by their gate fidelities. So even if you have 72 qubits, if your gate fidelities are at 98, 5 usable qubits. You could get to 150 qubits, you could get to 1,000 qubits. It just doesn't matter. So I really wish that the entire industry, we have quantum volume, but the industry goes out and says and talks about physical qubits as if it was a meaningful number. It's not. Right? It's the only thing, and we just saw the QEDC benchmarks that came out, and you can kind of see how every company is actually doing for actual algorithms, and you can see that it's not correlated at all to qubit count. It's entirely based on fidelity. Now, and you do have to have both. Like you could have really good fidelity and not enough qubits, and you'll be limited by the number of qubits, or you can have lots of qubits and a really poor fidelity and be limited by your fidelity. So anytime you read from here on in, anytime you read an article where it sits down and says this company expects by this to have so many physical qubits, it's completely meaningless. So they're just kind of lying to you.
So for somebody who's not a quantum physicist and just got into this 2 years ago, you certainly learned a lot, it sounds like. You certainly know what you're talking about. So you mentioned at the White House, everybody was talking about how far away are we, and it was all over the map. So
Yep.
for IonQ, how far away are we from meaningful?
So meaningful is a kind of an interesting, there's a couple of different places which are interesting. There's one place which is where we are today, which we're now starting to see is actually starting to be interesting. But there's I think the industry thinks there's several places where there's an interesting place at about 29 qubits. In simulation, the quantum computer will go faster. You could still do it in simulation, but it's going to actually start to be faster on the quantum computer. At about 36 qubits, you start to no longer be able to do full simulation. And so that's an interesting place. If you can get to 36 usable qubits and more, you start to leave simulation behind. And it's very, very difficult for the classical industry to catch up because they have to keep doubling the amount of memory on a GPU system or in physical memory. I mean, at 50 qubits, you need, about 10 petabytes of memory. At 51 qubits, you need twice that. So it's just not likely in our lifetimes that you're going to see simulation for 100 qubits, as an example. We'd have to convert all the matter on the planet to memory to be able to hit 100 qubits we'd have to convert all the atoms in this planet to transistors to be able to do 100 qubits in simulation. So simulation, beating quantum simulation is an interesting milestone. Many people think that about 70 qubits is the place where, good enough qubits, these algorithmic qubits we talk about, maybe not logical qubits are not needed by that time because the quantum circuits are not big enough. You only need enough error correction for the sizes of the circuit that you're doing. No point in going overboard. And so, at about 70 qubits is now where you can start to see applications that the world's largest supercomputers or the cloud itself would not be able to keep up. And then after that, you're in your unique space. You're now in fault-tolerant quantum computing. The only place you can do this calculation would actually be on a quantum computer. So those are kind of the various different things. And to answer for, for IonQ, we're today at 22 algorithmic qubits. So you can and we've put together a roadmap which is available online. And what we think kind of in the next basic, 2 years, we'll see kind of machine learning be the first place where we will stand up, and I'm sure others will too, stand up endpoints on the cloud where you don't need to know anything about quantum. You just send us a data set and we create a machine learning model. Like what we did with Fidelity is we took historical stock data and we created a model that compared two stocks. And so in the future, you'll be able to send us not just stock data, but data from any two variables and many more. And then we will create a machine learning model for you using a quantum computer and return that back to you. And so that will really be kind of the first place where it really starts to drive large amounts of usage.
So since we've got a room of investors and startups, I'm curious, and you've probably been working in your 2 years, you guys have raised a small amount of money.
Yep.
You've probably talked to a few investors in your 2 years. How important is it that an investor understand all of the technology versus looking at the business model? Like, where have your conversations been in talking to investors? What have you seen?
Well, investors, first, quantum is a hard thing to explain to anyone. I think somebody had suggested that we should give a Nobel Prize to the person who can explain quantum, and that's worthy of a Nobel unto itself. And so, and I think as an industry, and including IonQ, we struggle to explain kind of the benefit of quantum. So we need to do a better job at that. Clearly, we see investors that are confused, and it does take a great deal of education to explain to people kind of the basics in quantum. And so I'm from Boston, and so there used to be a guy up in Boston, Cy Sperling, who did ads everywhere, and he used to say, our best customer is an educated customer. And he was selling suits. And so I kind of think of that as well, that our best investor and our best customer is somebody who's well educated.
Great. So I want to see if we have time for just a couple questions.
Thank you.
Andre.
I posted a picture of you and your team on the balcony ringing the bell. It got 15,000 views, so a truly iconic moment for the industry. Since then, and it's only been a few days, another company announced a SPAC, a little smaller than yours, but pretty significant. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 1 or 2 other announcements before the end of the year. Two-part question: how do you think about spending the $636 million that you collected broadly, and as an industry as a whole, do you think all this money flowing in, is that too much, too little, good thing, bad thing?
So let me say what we're going to do at IonQ. We produced a roadmap, and we're going to spend that money to go faster. And so, I told my team on the day of the NYSE that we've just coming out of a time where there was a great deal of urgency to find a vaccine due to COVID. But the reality is that when you look at the human condition, that COVID is actually a blip, that cancer and Alzheimer's and many other conditions, climate change, are actually much more pressing. And so every day that we delay getting a quantum computer that can work on those things, we should have the same urgency that we had as a nation for finding a COVID vaccine. So what I plan to do is to spend that money to make that happen faster. I think for companies which are going to try the same route that we did, that the SPAC market is special purpose acquisition companies. It's we got in at a time where there was a lot of interest in that, but now it's difficult. And so I think that might be a difficult thing for people to follow us. I do think we are, as an industry, we will see over the next 2 to 3 years, several companies give up on their quantum hardware. Not commenting on that particular company, but where they'll just realize that they're so far behind and that the investment required to actually compete would be so large, even for the largest companies, that they'll just say, I think it's time to throw in the towel. So I expect that we will see kind of consolidation happen in the next 3 years, where we will consolidate around 2 or 3 kind of basic technologies.
I think we have time for another question if we have one. I know you are not shy. There's some.
Hi, Michelle Lampa from M Squared, and I'm from Boston. She's from Boston. You're from Boston. I'm assuming you're going to you're on testing some of your algorithms or some of your experiments. Have you already found the winner for March Madness upcoming? I'm assuming that should be top and foremost.
It should be top,
As a
but
sports
we're busily doing Bitcoin mining right now. So, by the way, I'm just joking on that.
There's the headline right there.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
No, we're actually working on breaking the encryption so we don't have to mine. So, just a bit, we did put out a paper on how to break encryption this year, but no, we're obviously. There's a bunch of really interesting problems that we're working on with customers right now.
But March Madness isn't one of them, I guess.
Yeah. If, 635 million plus an algorithm, you never know.
That's right. That's right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Chloe Holzinger. I'm from The Engine. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, what do you see as the next inflection point for quantum computing?
It's a great question. I think it's going to be these first applications which are going to show that, kind of thinking in a quantum way and running on a quantum computer will derive kind of commercial value. And so I expect that in the next year or so. It'll be the first kind of hint, right? I'm not expecting it to be $1 billion market, in that next year. But I think that's the first place we need. We've always said as an industry that we needed the killer application to show up. I mean, if the PC hadn't had the spreadsheet or the word processor, I'm not sure that we'd be using classical computers today. So I'm hoping it's machine learning. It's interesting, in the Valley, there's, I think, 30 companies which have, unicorn valuations, which is building specialized hardware to speed up machine learning. And so there's a lot of money invested in that. But in quantum computing, it's a general purpose computing device, and it looks like it might be able to speed them up even faster than any of those. So I'm hoping that's kind of the first place.
So I think we have a new title for my next book is called Quantum Thinking.
Quantum thinking.
I think that's copyright right now. Go ahead, George.
George Thomas with Connected DMV. What keeps you up in this roadmap not being met, not just for IonQ, just for quantum computing in general?
Yeah, no, so it's a good question. So I started at MIT when I was 16 working with Marvin Minsky. And for those who know, Marvin is the, kind of the, but maybe a little controversial, but kind of the father of AI. And, kind of in the very early days, we're talking 1976, on an 8K, computer, a PDP. And so, so the AI industry went through, several hype cycles where we had companies come out and say, in 3 years, we're going to have, Skynet. And so, and went out and raised a ton of money and could not deliver on those promises. And so, and then it got to the point where the 90s, that if you showed up with a business plan that had AI in it to a venture capitalist, they literally threw you out of the building. They were like, I don't want to hear about that stuff. And it took us another, 20 years to overcome what had been said in the 80s, right? And so in any industry, if we're not careful, you can overpromise what it is you can deliver, and then you go into, in the AI, it was called the AI winter. Now the question is, will we have a quantum winter? And so, and this is a little worrisome because it's not just one company. One company goes out there and says, oh, we're going to have, and raises a ton of money, and says we're going to have a, million qubit working quantum computer in 3 years and doesn't deliver, then it really hurts the entire industry, right? And so it puts a question to kind of, well, obviously those investors didn't understand everything about quantum for that company, got fooled by it, Now the question is, there's something about all these other companies we don't understand. So that's the concern. Now, if we get one company that can get to a place where they can show that quantum works, then all those other things doesn't really matter. We can have lots of hype. We just need in AI, we never got to a place where there was a HAL or a Skynet or something like that. There was just lots of hype. And so, so we just need to make sure at least one company manages to get to kind of nirvana on that to stop the quantum winter.
So,
obviously, we think it's IonQ, but you know.
So when your computer like starts up, you know how like on Windows you used to have this startup sound. I think yours should be, would you like to play a game?
Yeah.
For those of you who are too young
Yeah,
to know
no,
that.
I think
War
they're all
games.
too young.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. No, but that's just fascinating. You're right. I mean, and it's we heard that for a lot of startups when we did our research into the Quantum Startup Foundry. They were worried about overhype and the overpromising. You know, if you overpromise and then you fail to deliver. So how do you know? That's a balance you have to strike, especially when you're talking to investors. You need to be realistic, but you also need to be aspirational. And so.
Actually, it's kind of related to SPACs too. And I'll tell a little story. I sold a company to Thomson Financial, and they said to me, we'll have this transaction done in 6 weeks. And when you're selling a company, you put together a projection of your future sales, and that's in part what the value of the company is. And so I put together this rosy projection, and then instead of taking 6 weeks, it took 9 months. And then I had to go spend the next 9 months actually hitting those numbers that I told the buyer, and that was just a super, super difficult thing to do. I did it, but boy, that was a tough one. If you look at the SPAC market right now, what happened is a lot of companies went out and they said, this is what we think that we're going to do, and it was very rosy projections. And then the SPAC market took longer than they thought, and now they find themselves 9 months later, just like me back at Thomson, having to hit the numbers that they projected to get the valuation that they did. And so a lot of what's wrong with the SPAC market right now is that overhype, that kind of overjealous. And the companies that have really gotten hammered are the companies that said, oh, in 2021, we're going to do umpteen millions of dollars, and then they didn't hit their numbers.
Yeah.
So it's there in the SPAC market. We don't want it to be there in the quantum market.
Great. We have time for one last question. So, John, go ahead.
Thank you. This was great. So it's something that Warily brought up and then has popped up a few times over the last couple of days is the question of, we're engaging in this international global race for quantum, what is the appropriate level of regulation and export control from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously there's you know, some potential for bad actors in quantum because it has the potential to break encryption. And so the question is what do we do about that? And national security and a bunch of things. The sad part is that the supply chains today for everything, including quantum, is now global. Mm-hmm. And so if we came out and did a kind of nationalistic cry to say that, you know, that quantum computers need to be just inside the United States, if you look at our quantum computer, it has parts from all over the world, including China. And so, you know, we wouldn't want every other country to come through and say, well, we're not going to sell you lasers for your quantum computer. We're not going to sell you these parts for your quantum computer, because that would slow us down. So I don't think we have a good answer yet. I think the industry needs to work on this. I'm worried that if politicians tried to come in and do it, it would be a kind of a blunt force, you know, trauma to the industry, because there isn't really, at some level, for any of these technologies, a made in USA only, you know, quantum computer. So, so maybe we need to think about a different way of doing that. Now, obviously, there's, you know, before Congress, there's kind of trying to bring back to you know, the U.S. chip production and all the rest of that. But even if that would still be many years away. And then the other thing is, I'm sure not all things will be made in the U.S. So anyway, so we need to figure out that problem, but at the same time, kind of not throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will.
Well, and I think that's a great way to kind of wrap it up. Hold your babies, throw your bathwater. And that was one of the reasons at the QSF that we looked at this and said this is a global ecosystem. To require companies to move to Maryland to work with them seemed very short-sighted because of this very, dependency on supply chain and on just the global connected ecosystem is what we're all here about. And so, Peter, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We are, I think, a half a mile maybe from your office,
Indeed.
so we're very thankful to have you as our neighbor. And in fact, we have a number of folks who are going to get to go and tour your beautiful new expansion in your facility this afternoon.
Yeah, we spent $6 million with the university here to build out this space. Before this space, the water was coming through the ceiling, and it looked like an abandoned warehouse.
It was.
So, yeah.
It was our old furniture depot. It had no bathrooms, no electricity, no HVAC. So when you see it, you'll have a true appreciation for the renovations.
Yeah.
But thank you for your partnership. And I think there's more work that we're going to be doing together.
I think so too.
Very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that was a perfect way to wrap up the day and a half of the Quantum Investment Summit. So thank you. It's surely been a day and a half of connections, collaboration, enlightenment, frankly. And we're really excited to continue. So this is just the inaugural. We will be back next year. We hope to see all of you and then some. And those companies that are interested in applying for our pre-traction program, our applications are due on the 22nd of October, so please reach out to us. And can't wait to see what's evolved over the next year and see who else we get to have up here talking about your incredible success. So thank you all for joining us, and let's go out and disrupt. Thank you.